Okay, so we're trying something a little different that I thought I'd do. Um, I mentioned a little bit during and after the majors race that I would release what we did with our Lotus 49 setup. And it's taken a couple of days and it's taken a bit of time, mainly just to find a little bit of time where I could put something together. But essentially, I wanted to kind of explain what we did and why we did it. And if people like this, then this might be something that we kind of can keep doing going forwards. So the aim here is for this to be about maybe anywhere between 10 to 20 minutes long, just kind of talking through the setup and talking through a couple of maybe the key points as to what we did, why we did it, and how I got to those numbers. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that what we're doing here is going to be the best way. It worked pretty well for me. Not saying that you can't find other things that work, but I just thought it might be a cool thing to occasionally, every now and again, go through a setup that I know I can talk about without kind of really ruffling people's feathers on terms of releasing information and so on, and give guys a bit of an idea as to kind of how I go about things and how others probably go about things the same way. Now, as you can already see, the car looks insane. And there's a very good reason why the car looks insane, and it comes down to what track we're at and how the suspension works on this particular car. Now, it's been known for a while that Camber is just enormous when it comes to any of the oval side of things, right? So when I loaded up the Lotus 49, the immediate first thing that I went to was looking at how can we get as much camber as we can and what the maxes are and so on and so on. So in, say, a higher class car like the Cup car, the max is 6 on the front and 3.5 on the rear. Now, for those cars, they've been intentionally built by iRacing in a way where we can't really mess with those numbers anymore in the same ways that we used to. Back in 18, we would try really crazy things, kind of like what you're seeing here, to get more dynamic camber out of the car. Now, this is an old car that not many people race, and because of that, let's just say that certain things are less constrained than they might otherwise be. Now, before I talk about the cambers and so on, I just want to make a quick point on air pressures. Now, if we go to the garage screen, and I'm just going to load up the Indianapolis setup so that I can show you how and why we got to where we did. So, just quickly looking at the air pressures here, you can see that it starts off at like 25s, and you can go as low as 15s, and you can go as high as 30s, which, to be honest, is actually quite a narrow window and makes it quite nice to work with. Now, the initial setup that I started with had the air pressures at 20, and as I've said before in other things, my sort of go-to is to kind of sweep them up and down like 2.5 psi each way and kind of home in. So I did exactly the same thing here with this car, and I can show you that by loading this chart right here. So essentially, what I did was I was just doing 15 lap runs where I went. You can see column D was by 20s, which was essentially what I started on. Now, you can see there's no 17.5. I kind of shortcutted a little bit. I went straight down to 15s just to see if there's anything there. Clearly, I went way slower. It was useless. It was really bad. I then went up 2.5 to 22.5s. I got a bit quicker, and then I went up another 2.5 to 25s, and I started getting slower again. There is another column on the spreadsheet that you can't see if you're wondering why the differences are not adding up to 0 at the bottom. The reason that one's not included is because that was a 22.5 pound run, but with some other changes. So just to simplify it down for this, I cut it to just the runs with the air pressure. So as you can see, that's kind of how I homed in on my air pressure target. I got to 22.5, and then when I went to 25, I got slower. I realized, okay, 22.5 is probably where I want to be. Now back to the main thing, which everybody wants to know about why the car looks so funny. Now, as I said before, with regards to the camber and so on, when it comes to oval racing, camber is just outright mid-corner speed, and because you don't have very many really slow corners, you don't really suffer with the drive off penalty that you would on, say, like a tight road course. So if we go to the chassis page, keeping in mind this is the Indianapolis setup that we're looking at here. So what we can see is that the cambers are a little bit weird. But if we just straight up go and max them out, and by max them out I mean max positive lefts and max negative rights for an oval. Okay, so you can see here with the Indianapolis setup, which has got roughly equal ride heights, okay? You can see that you can get plus 1.1 left side, roughly plus 1 left sides, and then negative 3.3 on the rights. Now, what I realized was that the more you can dump the left side heights down, so say if I wind this spring perch all the way down, you can see now, even though I've only got a 0.2 of an inch difference, my right front camber has gone to the moon. So essentially what I was trying to do is I was trying to maximize this as much as I could. But and the way I did this was by really just pulling the right side as high as I could go and dumping the left side as low as I could go. You can see here that you can actually you can go higher than is necessary. So you do this and you get to kind of here, right? And you'll find that your left front perch is basically the limiting factor here. So you just kind of have to set off of that. So like you get to there and you get plus 2.6 and negative 5.7, negative 3.8 plus 3.4. The issue that you run into here though, and the reason why if you just go out and track with this like this and it kind of feels broke, is because if you remember, this is a road car, right? So and it's got anti-roll bars both in the front and the back. Well, on an oval car, which is kind of sort of intended to have these height splits, what you're allowed to do is you're allowed to adjust like the amount of I'm just going to call it the amount of torque in the bar. Is labeled as preload. Same deal. Now, because it's a road car, it's not expecting you to do this. So this is really unhappy right now because the bar is like completely cranked. And so if you go and drive it on track, it drives horrendously. So to make it work, what I did was I just took the bars out of the car completely. So my front bar was 0. You could put the arms at whatever you want because there's no bar there now. And you can see now my left front is even lower. And my right front perch was completely wound all the way out. My left rear was wound all the way down like this, and then everything else was literally adjusted off of the spring heights and the left front perch, really. Wind it back up. Okay. And now you can see that we've now got negative 6.7 right front camber. We've got negative 5 on the rear, but that's kind of a function of our springs right now. And we've got roughly 4s on the left, which if I now click cancel, and okay, this is my actual setup right now that you can see. But say okay, so you can see on my actual setup what my heights are. I've got a 1.5 inch height split, and I've got 6.7 degrees right front camber. Now, if I go and load, say, the Indianapolis baseline, and I just max the cambers, as I was saying before, you can see that we only get to 3.3 with a level ride height. So by cranking the car completely down on the left side, like I did, that was how I effectively doubled the amount of camber we could get, and that was why our car had so much mid-corner speed. And that was also a little bit why it was kind of edgy on exit, because everything was built around this. And it worked. It really did work, and the qualifying speed was immense. And the other reason why it works so well is because I noticed the tires on this thing just don't get hot. And because the tire doesn't get hot, it means it doesn't ever drop off. And that kind of lets you really abuse it with the camber numbers without suffering any penalties at all. Which is what led to the basic idea behind the setup. So I'll just load up the qualifying setup again. So as you can see, this is my setup now. I just wanted to use the base to show you how I got there with the heights and so on. So you can see I had the cambers, as I said, the 6s. You'll notice that the rears are lower. Okay, why are the rears lower? Well, even though we had all this mid-corner speed from the camber, the balance was kind of off. Okay? And in order to get the balance back, everything else was really kind of built around that. And what I noticed with the car was I noticed that it really didn't want to turn on entries. And then it'd be really kind of tight in the middle of the corner, all the way through to exit where it would sort of snap. So what I started doing was I started looking at ways of how I could get more entry turn out of the car. And as I found on some of the road course cars and so on, the higher you have the rear up, so the more rake you've got in the car, the more rotation you're going to have. So I already had like the right rear perch wound out. As you can see here, it's at 0. And part of that reason was for the camber, as I've said. But then I also put a 275, which is the max right rear spring in the car, to really hold it up as high as I could. So this right rear corner literally, it can be higher if the left side was pulled up, but for what we're doing, this is as high as it can be, and I'm trying to get as much rotation as I can out of just having the car raked up. When it comes to, say, other things in the setup, again, the casters were maxed because the more caster you have, the more dynamic camber you have when you turn the steering wheel. So again, that was all about trying to gain some more camber out of the car. If you see me looking down, by the way, it's because I tried to note this out a little bit. Same with the brake bias. The brake bias is at 50, which seems insane. But again, it was all about trying to get the car to rotate on the initial part of the corner so that we could get turned in, kind of just float through the middle of the corner using all the camber, and then just get the car pointed and come out of the corner as straight as possible. Now, the left rear spring is also at 275, and that was really there to counter the right rear spring, because it was difficult on corner exit. It really was. It was not a particularly easy car to drive on corner exit, and also the cross weight was really compromised to get what we were doing. As you can see here, it's 48.4, which I know a lot of the guys who race ovals will be like, "Wow, that's really low." And yeah, it is, and that's part of why I have this left rear spring in there, because that's there to tighten the car up and to try and make our exit somewhat drivable. And that's kind of really the logic in the springs in general in this car. The left front and the right rear, they're all about kind of getting the right rear to stay up, the left front to sit down, to give me as much camber as possible. So that's why the right rear is as stiff as possible, and that's why the left front is there to kind of allow the car to collapse down. And then I use the left rear spring and the right front spring as really what's determining my balance. Now, the left rear is maxed again because I said I wanted it for the corner exit, and the right front, the lower I could run the right front relative to the left front, the more turn I was getting again. But this was kind of where I reached a limit in terms of what was kind of good. I ran a 350 on the qual set because it had a good deal of cut, but in the race I ran a 375 just to kind of make it a little bit milder. So that's all my logic on the springs. Again, there's no anti-roll bars because if the anti-roll bars being torqued up really makes the car horrible. I've touched on the brake bias again on the corner entry and so on. The toes are at 0. The reason the toes are at 0 is that's just because I tested other values. I tested both negative and positive at both ends of the car, and to be honest, only differences deviating from 0 made in this car was it made it more unstable. If it really was just a case of any amount of toe just made the car unstable. It didn't actually matter which direction I went. you would end up with wandering from the car no matter what. So I just left them at 0. That really did seem the best for me. The shocks, again, this car's really old. It's going pretty fast around here with it being on an oval. So I just maxed them out. I felt like they were lacking authority on the car anyway. And I just maxed them out just to try and keep everything tied together a bit better. Might not be optimum. Probably isn't optimum, to be fair. But it's what I found worked for me. Now, moving away from the tires and just general chassis kind of stuff, which I think we've pretty covered there, really. If anybody does have any questions, feel free to ask me directly either afterwards in the comments or so on. But I'm going to move on to the drivetrain side of stuff now. Now, I'm going to go over the diff first. So you can see we've got 1 clutch plate. You can go as high as 4. But what I noticed with the diff was, again, the biggest struggle I had with this car was mid-corner. And it wasn't mid-corner speed, it was mainly mid-corner balance. In how I was always struggling to get entry and mid-corner to turn. So, I was struggling to get entry and mid-corner to turn. And I was having an issue where it would come off the corner and it would snap. So, what I was trying to do here was, you can see that my coast ramp angle is 75, and my clutch plates is 1. So this is giving me literally as little amount of locking as I can possibly have when I'm off throttle. And this was all about trying to get as little lock-in through entry and center so the thing would really turn and really roll through the corner that way. Now, you can see that sort of opposingly, the drive ramp angle is 35. And the reasoning for that was that both the drive ramp and the preload are again similar, where they're set to have they're pretty much on the limit as low as locking as you can go. Now the drive ramp I put as low as possible because what I was after on corner exit was different from what I was wanting on entry center. I wanted as much stability as possible. So I did want locking as I got on the throttle because I wanted as much drive as I could get off the corner. And I've touched on in a couple of previous videos that kind of the more locking you can have in a straight line, the better. So that's why the drive ramp angle is as low as possible. The preload is literally there to stop the inside wheel spinning as I come down the front stretch. And I could not go any lower than 50 foot-pounds of preload. But this was a really compromised setting because the lower preload I had, the less locking everywhere. So on corner entry and in mid-corner, I had more turn. But I couldn't go any lower than 50 because as I come off the corner, if I was lower, I wouldn't have enough locking to stop the inside rear wheel spinning. So that again sort of forms part of why the drive ramp angle's low, the preload is sort of low, and kind of how the settings are sort of offsetting each other. Essentially, there was no real right answer here. I just prioritized trying to get into and through the middle of the corner. So that's really how my diff is set. And the last thing when it comes to gears is I decided that what I was going to do was I was going to try and have 4th gear as the gear I would run in like the whole time. So I was trying to get 4th to be as close to a 1-1 as I could. So that's why I ended up with a 487 final drive and a .958. I did try running a 1-1 on 4th. Now, this is absolute speculation on my part, but I feel like the closer you can get the ratio to 1-1, the maybe the less loss you're gonna have, because you're not changing anything. You're not like sort of exchanging torque for speed and so on. So that was really what the idea behind that was, and it just kind of conveniently worked out that fourth was a good gear that worked this way. And the way I was set up was I was set up so that right as I would get to the point where I wanted to brake, I would start hitting the rev limiter. And that's why 5th is just a little bit longer. 5th is a worse gear because it doesn't get on the limiter and the the shortest gear that you can run here without losing lap time is better because it slows the car down for you on entry. So that's why hitting the limiter on your own isn't really a big problem. But obviously when you're in somebody's draft, it might have been difficult to pass them like this. So fifth gear was set up as kind of an emergency gear, where it was just a little bit longer just to allow a little bit more speed if I was in the draft. First gear, totally useless. It's in these cars where I'm not using all the gears, what I'll sometimes try and do is I'll sometimes try and set first gear to be equivalent to the pit road speed, so that, say, guys who don't want to monitor their speed, they can just bounce the limiter as they come down pit road. Couldn't do that in this car. Couldn't get it short enough. Couldn't get it short enough to do that. Couldn't get it long enough to be useful on the track. So it was kind of just a wash. This was just a gear in case you needed to get out the pit box and whatever you preferred. Now, second and third were set up for the restart, and I will show that here. So what you can see here is that we're at 55, which is pace speed, and we're kind of rolling along at about 5,500. Now, this first ramp here is all second gear, and then we change here, and when we go to third, ignoring this big peak here, we drop down to about 73.50 roughly, and then we go up, and then we change to fourth, and we drop down to about 75.66. This was as close to matched as I could get them. I just wanted to be dropping in at like the same point on the power band both times, and 5,500 seemed a good place to start. You had a good deal of pull from that point, but you weren't either excessively high or low, kind of pulling away. So that's how the gears were set for that. I just thought that might be like interesting for people. And really that's how the car was set. That's exactly all the ideas that went into it. Obviously the biggest thing was the cambers. And everything was really built around maximizing as much camber as we could get out of it for the mid-corner speed. And then after that, it was all about balance and all about trying to get neutral or slightly loose car for the entry center part of the corner to get it turned, and then after that to kind of have as much stability and as much drive as we could get off the corner. And the gearing was just a function of the track and trying to get the restarts pretty much as easy as possible for the person driving, because I find if you have big steps in gears, it can be a bit unnerving. Not to mention you get like a weird rate of acceleration. Like say if you've got really short gears to start and then you go to like a long one, it's like suddenly you stop going, and just not a big fan of that. Now, this was something new that I was just experimenting with. I'm just curious to see if people like this. If you do, then great. I'd like to hear about it. The setups themselves, I'm going to put both the Q set and the race set that I raced. They will be available on my Discord. On my Discord, you will find a link for underneath the video. If you have any setup questions and so on relating to iRacing, or if you have any modec questions and say spreadsheet questions, then cool. Come over to Discord. I'll try and answer them as best I can. I got a couple other guys in there. I got Dallas Pataska. He answers a lot of late model stuff and super late model stuff. I got Ashton Crowder in there. He drops in, answers a couple of things as and when he can. We do try and help people if they're looking to build setups. What we tend not to do is we tend not to directly give you a setup. We kind of only do that for things like this, where they're directly attached to videos and so on. But we will answer questions and we will help you build your own setup if you kind of work with us. So yeah, feel free to jump in the Discord. That's where you'll find these qualifying and race setups. And yeah, once again, if you liked it, sweet. If you didn't, sorry. Based on the feedback we get from this, we'll kind of determine how often we do this going forwards.